Over the last few years, images have circulated on social media depicting people's astonishment at the discovery of insects in food grocery stores. In recent years, as environmental and food security issues have intensified, discussions around alternative proteins have surged. The notion of insect protein as a staple food source has moved from the fringes to mainstream debate. Recently, an individual claiming to be a member of Anonymous added fuel to the conversation. Recently on social media, they claimed that by 2025, governments in various countries will start actively pushing insect protein as a primary food source, driven by rising environmental concerns, meat scarcity, and the high cost of traditional protein sources. This shift, the hacker alleged, will create a stark socio-economic divide where meat protein will become a luxury affordable only to the wealthy, while the general population, particularly those with lower incomes, will be left with insect-based options as the most affordable protein choice. The alleged anonymous hacker's statements were grounded in the economic and environmental realities that have been building over recent decades. Traditional meat production is resource-intensive, requiring significant amounts of land, water, and feed, which has placed immense strain on the planet's resources. Insect protein, which has not been well received for obvious reasons, has been touted for its efficiency and low environmental footprint, and has emerged as a potential solution to these challenges. According to the hacker, the trajectory toward insect protein as a staple food item will be strongly influenced by governments and multinational corporations. The hacker's claims align with observable trends in food policy and industry practices. On a side note, common condiments and foods like canned corn, peanut butter, and curry powder frequently contain insect eggs and fragments, and that this is permitted by official standards. North Carolina State University's Department of Entomology asserts that it is infeasible to eliminate all insects from the food chain. Consequently, the United States Department of Agriculture imposes restrictions on the permissible quantity of insect eggs or insect fragments that food products may legally include for retail sale. Canned maize will often contain 2 insect eggs, and these are permitted per 100 grams. Peanut butter can contain 50 bug bits per 100 grams, and ketchup can contain 30 fruit fly eggs per 100 grams. Over the last decade, several companies have begun investing in insect farming technologies, and in some countries, insect-based products have already entered mainstream markets. Large agricultural corporations have backed insect protein startups, anticipating a future demand that could make insect farming a billion-dollar industry. The hacker predicted that by 2025, these corporations will have consolidated control over insect protein production and distribution, mirroring the monopolistic structures already seen in traditional agriculture. Consequently, consumers will see an abundance of insect-based food products marketed as affordable, nutritious, and environmentally friendly, though potentially at the expense of access to traditional protein sources. One of the most controversial aspects of the hacker's statement was the claim that traditional meat will become a luxury reserved for the wealthy. The hacker alleged that with meat production increasingly regulated, taxed, and limited, prices will surge, making meat an item that only those with high incomes can afford regularly. They suggested that even common meat products like chicken and beef could become akin to luxury goods, with niche, high-quality cuts monopolized by those able to pay a premium. Meanwhile, low-income individuals and families will have limited access to traditional meat, as their financial reality will only afford them insect protein options. This projected scenario, according to the hacker, reflects a disturbing trend toward a tiered food system where socioeconomic status dictates access to fundamental dietary choices. Critics of this potential shift point out that restricting affordable access to meat may lead to a range of public health issues. Traditional meat provides nutrients and dietary benefits that are not yet fully replicated by insect protein. While insects are a rich source of protein, essential vitamins and minerals, there are concerns about whether they can provide a nutritionally complete diet in the long term, especially for children, elderly individuals, and people with specific dietary needs. The hacker argued that government policies would likely push the narrative that insect protein is not only a sustainable choice, but also equally or even more nutritious than traditional meat, glossing over any potential health implications. If the hacker's claims hold true, this scenario could lead to significant public backlash and social unrest. Food is not only a biological necessity, but also deeply tied to culture, tradition, and identity. The idea of being restricted to insect-based protein due to one's financial standing could be seen as an affront to dignity and choice. The hacker suggested that such policies would widen the gap between social classes, leading to resentment as wealthy individuals maintain access to meat, a symbol of luxury and status. This, they argued, could create social division, with the diet of the wealthy contrasting starkly with the diet of the working class and impoverished. The hacker also hinted at a potential psychological and cultural shift as people adjust to insect protein. The notion that the global food system could evolve to favor insect protein, creating a socio-economic divide in dietary options, raises complex ethical, cultural, and health-related questions. Interestingly, people have already noticed that some of these products have appeared in shops, and remarkably, this was not an error, but rather a component of a snack that is set to be globally launched, with the intention of encouraging the majority of individuals to replace their meat consumption with the more cost-effective insects. The images were captured in Australia, where the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation has expressed aspirations for Australia to establish a significant presence in the lucrative billion-dollar worldwide edible insect sector. The researchers responsible for the bugs stated that Australia has a highly promising market for it and expressed their optimism that individuals will begin to transition to it. One researcher has stated that the edible insects sector is still regarded as a developing industry in this region, with a projected value of over $1 billion by 2023. That is to say, they anticipate that millions of Australians will consume insects within the next year, as they are now being promoted as more cost-effective than conventional meats. Scientists have said that people need to start eating bugs and less traditional meats, and that currently, Europe and the United States of America dominate the Western world market, with over 400 operational enterprises focused on edible insects. The researchers said that the insects possess nutritional profiles of significant significance, saying that they serve as a valuable addition to current dietary intake due to their beneficial effects on health, environmental sustainability, and plenty of alternative proteins. At present, about 2,100 insect species are ingested by a global population of 2 billion individuals from 130 nations. One announcement that caused uproar online was when scientists and researchers announced their intention to administer insects to youngsters aged 5 to 11, adding that they scheduled testing in 4 primary schools in Wales. The insects will consist of house crickets and mealworms, and they will be combined to produce a bolognese sauce. The scientific team stated that all of this meal will be derived from insect protein, with the intention of encouraging children and their parents to transition away from meat protein. The initiative, spearheaded by researchers from Cardiff University and the University of the West of England, intends to conduct surveys among primary school children to assess their perspectives on environmental concerns. The objective is to potentially influence their children's opinions on organic food and explore strategies to encourage its consumption. According to one of the researchers, the most effective approach to achieve this is by entering the school premises at an early stage, therefore influencing the perspectives of young individuals regarding conventional food choices and exposing them to the realm of insect protein. Following the hacker's revelation, public reaction was swift and largely negative, with widespread concern and even outrage over the implications of such a dietary shift. Social media platforms quickly became saturated with debates, criticisms, and fears about the future of food accessibility, with many users expressing strong resistance to the idea of insect protein as a primary food source. Critics argued that while environmental sustainability is crucial, it shouldn't come at the cost of people's dietary autonomy or their right to access a variety of food options, including traditional meat. The idea that only the wealthy might afford real meat while others are relegated to insect-based diets struck a chord, touching on fears of growing inequality in basic rights, including access to nutritious food. A common theme in public responses was the resentment toward what many saw as a paternalistic push by corporations and governments to solve sustainability issues by restricting options for the average person. Skeptics questioned why the burden of sustainability seemed to be falling disproportionately on regular citizens, rather than on corporations and industries that contribute the most to environmental degradation. Many argued that reducing environmental impact should start with reforms in large-scale industrial practices rather than individual diets. They viewed the push for insect protein as a way for powerful entities to deflect attention from the large-scale environmental harm they cause, placing responsibility on individuals instead. Some activists and advocates took issue with what they saw as the implicit classism in this potential dietary shift. They argued that limiting meat access based on income is a form of social engineering that could reinforce existing economic divides, even making them more pronounced. Many compared the proposed insect diet to historical examples of lower income groups being pushed toward foods that were stigmatized or seen as lesser. They feared that such a system could create a two-tiered food economy, one in which the wealthy eat high-quality, varied diets, while the general population is left with options that, though sustainable, may feel forced and inferior. One of the loudest concerns came from families and individuals who questioned the nutritional adequacy of insect protein. Many were hesitant to accept insect-based meals as their primary source of protein, citing the need for balanced diets that include various protein sources. They voiced concerns about whether insect protein could provide the full range of amino acids, vitamins, and minerals needed for a healthy diet over time. Though proponents of insect protein argue that it is rich in nutrients, skeptics questioned whether these claims had been sufficiently backed by long-term research. For parents especially, the idea of schools potentially adopting insect protein meals was troubling, as many worried about the possible health impacts on children. Cultural resistance also played a significant role in the backlash. In many cultures, traditional meat is deeply tied to identity, celebrations, and family traditions. For countless people around the world, meat consumption is more than a dietary preference. It holds cultural and emotional significance. The thought of replacing these traditional foods with insect protein was, for some, seen as an erasure of cultural heritage. Many felt that governments and corporations were overlooking the importance of food as a social and cultural institution, reducing it to a commodity that can be restructured without regard to tradition or sentiment. This backlash also sparked an increase in food activism, with people rallying to advocate for transparency and inclusivity in food policy decisions. Some groups pushed for policies that would prioritize affordable, sustainable meat alternatives over insect-based diets, such as plant-based proteins and lab-grown meat. Others emphasized the need for a more democratic approach, calling on governments to involve citizens in decision-making processes about dietary guidelines and agricultural policies. Some activists proposed the idea of subsidies for ethical and sustainable meat farming practices that would allow people to access meat without causing excessive environmental harm. To counter the push for insect protein, a wave of food sovereignty movements emerged, emphasizing the right of individuals and communities to choose their own food sources without external pressure. Advocates of food sovereignty argued that policies should aim to provide people with sustainable options without dictating specific dietary shifts. They pushed for diversified agriculture, food education, and investment in alternative proteins that maintain cultural significance and consumer choice. The potential replacement of traditional meat with insect protein, according to these movements, represents a threat to the very idea of food sovereignty by suggesting that economic status should determine access to diverse food sources. The negative reactions to this announcement also spurred discussions on the ethics of profit-driven food policy. Many critics pointed out that corporations investing in insect protein stand to profit immensely if the shift becomes widespread. They argued that the influence of corporate interests in promoting insect protein as a staple raises ethical questions about the motivations behind such policies. Are governments genuinely interested in sustainability, or are they, as some suggested, paving the way for a new market controlled by a few powerful corporations? The notion that individuals could be manipulated into accepting a diet determined by market forces rather than personal preference or cultural values raised concerns about consumer autonomy and the risks of monopolistic practices in food production. In the wake of this announcement, public dissatisfaction continued to grow, with many people expressing the desire for greater transparency, choice, and inclusivity in the conversation around sustainable diets. Some demanded that alternative solutions be explored and promoted, rather than what felt like a restrictive mandate toward insect protein for economic or environmental reasons. The backlash highlighted a significant tension between the urgency of sustainable practices and the rights of individuals to make dietary choices that align with their cultural, personal, and ethical beliefs. Ultimately, the uproar over the anonymous hacker's claims reflects a fundamental question. As society moves towards sustainability, who gets to decide what sacrifices are made and by whom? The push for insect protein has opened a broader conversation about equity, choice, and the balance between environmental responsibility and individual freedoms.